Dear friends, dear guests, welcome to America House. My name is Tatiana Strelchenko. I'm America House Kyiv director. So pleased to welcome you all here. Tonight, our program is dedicated to the theme of how to communicate Ukraine abroad to international audiences. Our program will happen in a hybrid format. We have our speakers here at America House with me on the stage. We have our audience here at America House, but we also have speakers who will tune in online, and I will introduce them in a moment. And also, we're streaming this program, so many more people will join us online, and I hope we'll have questions to us online. So let me start with introducing the speakers for tonight. With me tonight here, Oleksiy Sorokin is the co-founder and deputy chief editor at the Kyiv Independent. Welcome.
Thank you.
Luka Lobareva, she is a co-founder of Ukrainian PR Army. Happy to have you here.
Thank you very much.
And with us online, there are also two more speakers. James Wesley Jeffers, or Wes, he is the information officer or spokesperson of the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv. Hi, Wes. Welcome.
Hi there. Thank you.
And Yana Leshnevska. She's a fellow at the Newman Foundation for Journalism at Harvard University. And before that, she was contributing a journalist for BBC. Hi, Yana. Great to see you.
Hi, thank you.
So we have quite a few questions. I prepared my questions, but at some point I will really ask you, fellows, friends, to ask your questions to our guests. We've been thinking a lot about what's happening here in Ukraine. It's the second year of the full-scale invasion, but the war started 10 years ago. This week, we're also marking the anniversary of Heavenly 100 that happened also 10 years ago. A lot of tragic events in the history of Ukraine. And as many of you probably have read, the word that comes up quite often right now is the word fatigue. The world is tired of Ukraine, or so it seems. What do you think? Is the world tired of Ukraine and Ukrainian news?
May I start?
We can start with Oleksiy and then Luka.
Okay, absolutely no pressure speaking first. Well, first of all, the world is not tired of Ukraine. The world is tired of reading the same news for months and months and months, right? And unfortunately, looking at our coverage, our website, we see that the news that gained much more attention in March 2022 now receives less clicks, less page views, and so on. So we have to reinvent new formats, delivery, and so on. And unfortunately, that takes a lot of resources and time in our organization, basically, to force people to care about Ukraine and people dying here.
Thank you. Luka, what do you think?
We see actually like pretty the same picture. People are not tired, but we shouldn't expect that people will focus on one and only topic for during like 2 years in a row. So we're working with media and journalists, first of all, and we also reinvent kind of angles from where we communicate Ukraine. First of all, that was witnesses of war crimes, victims of war crimes, witnesses of Russian aggression against Ukraine. Then we also connected with experts that could comment topics and what is happening here. So we also reinvent topics, angles, and so on. Yeah.
I have so many questions, but I also want to give the opportunity for our guests online to join. Yana, you are in the United States right now. What do you see and observe there?
Yeah, I don't know if fatigue is the right word, but definitely when I speak to editors working for Western publications in the US in particular, they would confirm that news from Ukraine does not get as many views and clicks as it got in the early stages of the invasion, as was pointed out already. But I think the good news is that I still hear them confirming that the interest in Ukraine is still there. And even though the attention is not at the level that it once was, there is still this idea that news from Ukraine is hugely important because of its geopolitical significance, because of the impact that it has in so many regions around the world. So I see Western journalists still being ready to report on Ukraine. But I think also what's happening with news from Ukraine right now is part of a wider trend where people just consume less news in general, especially when it comes to, depressing kind of news. They don't trust the media. They feel disillusioned with the state of the world. And I think Ukraine is just sort of part of this wider story where we need to sort of reinvent our approach and make sure that people are still sort of involved in news reporting in general.
Thank you so much, Yana. Wes, what do you think?
Yeah, thank you. No, it's really interesting for me, because I'm also back in the United States right now. And sorry that I can't be there with you in Kyiv. I'm back here due to a family emergency, but I'm back in my hometown. It's a small town in West Virginia in the mountains, very conservative, very rural. And since I've been back, I've seen a lot of my friends from school and people that I've grown up with, family members, and they always ask me what's going on in Ukraine. Why do I need to care about Ukraine right now? So I agree with what everyone said. I don't think it's really fatigue per se. It's just kind of that everyone's so overwhelmed right now with news, with their lives. In my hometown, most people here, it's one of the poorer towns in West Virginia and in the United States. So most people here have 2 to 3 jobs, multiple children. And so that's kind of what they're consumed with every day. How do I feed my kids? How do I take care of my family? Much less trying to think outside of our state, much less trying to think outside of the United States. So I do think we have to come up with new ways to kind of talk about what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on with the full-scale invasion, and especially, for the United States, why U.S. assistance is so critical to what is happening in Ukraine. And I think there's some ways we can do that, which I know we'll get into. But yeah, I think we have to come up with new and innovative ways of discussing these things, of sharing stories, and of talking about this.
May I add here?
Please do. Thank you, Wes.
As Yana said, that we have lack of attention, but not interest. Now we have an approach, and we are telling media about Ukrainian resilience and creativity. For example, like during these 2 years, they were launched about 200 new tech startups and actually new businesses in Ukraine. So this is something that we can be proud of. And also, so before this 2-year anniversary of Russian full-scale invasion, we relaunched our project of untold stories of Ukrainians, and we gathered a lot of stories from very different sides, from medicals, from our defenders, from entrepreneurs, etc., from volunteers who actually really involved in fight this aggression. So, and we see the interest from journalists for these positive, heroic stories, resilient stories, and this is how we approach media today, and it works.
Thank you, Luca. So as I hear from all 4 of our speakers, I think the word that came up was reinvent ourselves. Like Alexei mentioned, new formats. Luca mentioned new angles, new ways, new methods, and you already started talking about some of them. Alexei, maybe you can tell a little bit more. So how do we all reinvent ourselves to the world?
Well, again, when the full-scale war started, obviously we were just posting news about everything that's happening. Now we have to think outside the box. We launched, for example, last year, the War Crimes Investigation Unit that is specializing on documentaries. It takes them 3 months to produce one documentary, and it's pretty expensive, but the output and what we see among our viewership is that people are interested in those high quality, for example, products, right? We have screenings in Ukraine, in Zhovtin Cinema. We have them on YouTube now. The team is in the United States, by the way, from Washington to Texas, screening our war crimes films which focus on children being killed and children being kidnapped by Russians, right? So that's one format. The other formats are, we're trying to write more stories about business in Ukraine. A lot of people are interested in investments and reconstruction and that kind of stuff, right? So we established a whole business desk to cover this topic. We also are trying to gain more presence in different social media platforms, right? We found out a year into our existence that Reddit is a big deal, actually, and we actually invested. We have a special SMM specialist who is in charge of coverage on Reddit. And so there's a lot of stuff going on, and our approach is that we'd rather do more and see what works and what sticks than to keep doing the same thing that we did and expect people to suddenly start caring again.
Experimenting and seeing what works. Thank you. Yana, what would you suggest?
Yeah, I found myself in an interesting situation right now because before coming to Harvard, I worked for over a decade at the BBC in Ukraine, where my job was literally to explain Ukraine to foreign audiences. So here I do it mostly on an interpersonal level, not necessarily as a journalist. And this is a completely new experience for me. But what I have discovered is that stories that work with foreign audiences are the same, whether you present them as a journalist or whether you present them as an individual, just, a human being coming from Ukraine. So, and usually these are the stories of, people living in Ukraine, living in the current difficult conditions. So just to give you like a very basic example, I'm taking a nonfiction writing class at Harvard, and I wrote a story there about how I miss my collection of books that I left at home when I left my apartment on the 24th of February 2 years ago. And I know it's hard for people in the West to maybe relate to the experience of a soldier fighting in the trenches or to a civilian losing their home, but my classmates told me that they could actually see themselves in this situation. They kind of imagined that this could be them, like abandoning their, book collection or, a vinyl collection or family photos. And they really related, that really resonated with them. And I think that's like a very basic example of what could be a bigger approach to telling stories about Ukraine.
Actually, can
Thank
I
you. Please.
jump in? Yeah. Surprisingly, on our website, human stories are the least read stories among our Ukrainian coverage. So if it's some kind of extraordinary story with a really powerful kind of main hero, yes, but in general, the human side is less interesting for a lot of people, unfortunately.
This leads me to my next question. Do you think there should be differentiation between stories and materials for Ukrainian internal audiences and the ones abroad, international? Or everything should be the same, similar experiences, people read and decide?
Well, we write in English, so most, like 90% of our audiences are outside of Ukraine, and we cater to their interests. But I would say that our coverage is different from the coverage that Ukrainska Pravda does, for example, or Новое Время, because, well, first of all, reporting is different, and the style of journalism is really different. But also, people in Ukraine who witness, all of them witness war, they care about slightly different things, right? Obviously, if there's I don't know, a Russian warship is attacked, then everybody likes it. Everybody cares. It gets clicks both in Ukrainian media and in foreign media. But if we're talking about long format stories, then it's a completely different ballgame.
Thank you. Luca, what do you think?
I would also say, I would add that we saw the difference between geographies. Mm-hmm. So, for example, French media is more like positive to stories of children, and they care of children very much. We even have now like a separate stream, separate advocacy campaign, like Where Our People, where we tell stories about forcible deportation. You also mentioned it, not only children, but adult people. So and we worked closely with French media in this. When there was a stream of food safety, for example, so we worked with a little bit. We touched this big, I would say, market of Africa and Middle East. So like Egypt, it was really tough because that's not so. It's not so like free as European, for example, media. So I would say the geography is different, and I think here
And cultural context.
Yeah, cultural context as well. Yeah, of course.
Thank you. Wes, the question to you. You also mentioned new methods and new ways of supporting, conveying Ukrainian stories to the world. And I just wanted to ask about how does U.S. Embassy support independent Ukrainian media? Are there any specific projects, initiatives?
Yeah, great question. So I was going to say it's interesting because at the U.S. Embassy, for our press team, our primary goal, really with every press team at every U.S. Embassy around the world, is to talk to the public inside of that country. So for us, it's talking to the Ukrainian public and explaining the United States, explaining what we're thinking, what we're doing, what assistance we're providing. So that's always our primary goal. And then secondary is we're kind of working with the White House and other government agencies and government leaders in the United States, informing them what we're seeing, what's working, what's not working, so that they're able to really communicate to the American people and the American public about, what is happening here, why assistance is important, all of those types of things. But to your question on how we support free, independent media, that is a strong priority for us. We have really good relationships with all of the media outlets and most journalists across Ukraine. We also have a pretty robust grant program where we're able to give money to different media outlets, journalists, and others for a variety of different reasons. But, usually it revolves around reporting independently and helping people to be able to do that, whether it's being used to kind of counter Russian disinformation and malign narratives, or if it's used for something else as well. But we have a number of programs like that. We also have a number of different educational exchange programs, some of them focused on journalists and, free and independent reporting as well. All of those types of things have different rules and regulations that go with each of them, but we do have a lot of resources that we're able to utilize for journalists across the country. And it's something that we're continually trying to do, especially since we're based in Kyiv. We're always trying to support people outside of Kyiv as well, and get outside of Kyiv as much as possible to meet with people, to support outlets and support people further afield than Kyiv as well.
Thank you, Wes. When we're thinking about powerful stories, we think about emotions. What were the emotions in the first year of the full-scale invasion in 2022, in the second, and what do you think is happening right now here, maybe in Ukraine and abroad, if you have this understanding?
A really philosophy type, philosophical question. Emotions. Well, the problem with, again, coverage of events in Ukraine right now is that people are less emotionally attached to what's happening in Ukraine because, again, if you read about, I'm going to use this example, a family being attacked somewhere, and you hear the first time that that's horrible, people supported Ukraine, people donated to us for our coverage, right? Then you hear stories like this 5, 10, 50, 100, right? And then you understand that for people, that's what's happening in Ukraine. That's just it. And unfortunately, even people get used to even the most horrible war crimes. People are used to Russians doing what they do, right? If we're talking about Russia, nobody's surprised that a person died in Russian prison on February 16th, right? Unfortunately, that's what Russians do. And with Ukraine as well, unfortunately, we can get connected to the people on an emotional level as we did in 2022. We have to offer them some new interesting, visually attractive coverage for them to actually be willing to listen to us, even though horrible stuff is happening all around us.
Thank you. What do you think, Luca?
I would agree here, and people are not so. It's not very touching now. Such tragic emotions. It should be something very very powerful, like Kakhovska has, for example. That was something that really shocked people. Something shocking. After Bucha, there were not so many things that would shock people. So that's why it's also very important to find different angles and to tell not only tragic stories about Ukraine. Yes, we are like Ukraine is a victim here. It's 100%, but it's not only the only thing we are. Actually, we are not only victims. We are very strong people, and we should tell our stories of resilience. And this word also, it's a good association that could be built, and we should promote it.
Thank you. Yana, may I ask you?
Yeah, I think picking up on this point of resilience and defiance, when I look back at the early stages of the full-scale invasion, there were so many stories like that, and they worked, I think, really well at the time. And I think it's still hugely important to highlight those stories, especially if they're true, not making them up. There is no shortage of, heroic actions being, being carried out by Ukrainians right now, whether they're soldiers or civilians. But I do think there's an important angle to these stories that is sometimes missing. We need to highlight the fact that Ukrainians do not have a choice. It's their only, being resilient is their only way. And it's not sustainable to rely on Ukrainian resilience for an indefinite period of time. So Ukraine needs support, and I think that should be a key angle in those stories about Ukrainian defiance.
Thank you so much. I think, Luca, you mentioned before that you do project with collecting human stories,
Yeah.
personal stories. Do you do fact checking? I think Yana touched like a very important point. Like, how do you fact check those stories?
We have a team of about 30 people working full time for PR Army, and among them there are like people who work with journal requests and collecting these stories, and some of them I don't remember the name, unfortunately, but we have a colleague that actually work face to face with these people and connect journalists with these peoples of stories, like in Kyiv, in Kharkiv, and different places. So she see these people, and we also have a couple of people who really check speakers, experts, like witnesses and people's stories, experts for their bios, and etc., etc. Yeah, of course, we do this.
Okay, thank you. And what do you think are the successful or not successful, but let's say working examples of Russian narratives and disinformation and propaganda that are actually working abroad, not in Ukraine, but they are successful there? And how we can combat them? If you have this, of course, information.
Yeah, well, the problem is that at the start again of the full-scale invasion, everybody thought that okay, everybody sees for like what Russia is. Everybody knows what Russia does. There's facts on the ground, but the facts are distorted, right? Now we have a part of American Congress blocking aid to Ukraine. We have people in Poland who think that it's okay to block the only working border with Ukraine. So, and if we think that, well, Russian propaganda is not involved and Russian propaganda is not working, well, it is, and it's really, really successful because Russians were able to paint themselves as just one of the two sides. It's one of the countries at war. Yes, there's an ongoing war, but Ukrainians are also doing horrible stuff, according to Russians. Ukrainians are also mistreating, for example, POWs, which is absolutely not true, but it's hard to for us to actually prove this, because even though we fact check all the information, we show what's actually happening on the ground. We're Ukrainian media in Ukraine, and we sometimes get comments like, well, understandably, you're rooting for Ukraine because you're in Ukraine, right? And so we know that a lot of our stories, especially tied with stuff like grain or something like that, we have a lot of bots that come and act as citizens of, for example, Poland. Are like, well, actually, it's not as you presented. It's, I'm from Poland. This is how it is, and they're working. Russia is really rich. Russia is actually using the resources to paint itself as a victim, and it's pretty successful, unfortunately, in doing it.
Thank you. Anything else, colleagues, would you like to add to this?
Yes, just one thing from me. I think one of the Russian disinformation campaigns that's been particularly successful was the one targeting the global South, where there is this narrative that this is an imperialist war, only that it's a war against US imperial influence rather than Russian imperial influence. And considering the grievances that countries of the global South have historically had towards the US, it's been sort of easy for Russia to do that, and it's hard for Ukraine to counter those narratives. But I think this is one of those things where a lot of it comes from, our own sort of failure and inability in the past to really explain the nature of this conflict to audiences over there. I mean, Ukraine has been obviously focused on telling its story to audiences in the West, because this is where most of the support comes from. But I think it's hugely important to work with audiences in, Asia, South America, Africa as well, and because we have like a lot of work to do there.
Thank you, Jana. Wes, do you observe any of those campaigns in the US?
Yeah, if I can just add, so this is one of our big focuses at the U.S. Embassy as well. Just in our team, in the press team, we're kind of bolstering it this year in 2024, adding in some new positions, adding in new money, new resources, just focused on countering Russian disinformation. Like my colleagues on the stage said, any division you see, there is almost always some type of Russian influence at play or malign influence at play, whether it's some division in the government of Ukraine, in the US government, in Poland, anywhere in the world, we're seeing more and more and more Russian influence in these things. So it's important to have programs in place to really teach people media literacy, so people aren't just swayed by the first thing that they're reading, but then also different things in place to kind of call out and counter this type of disinformation when we can. So that's what we're trying to do in a variety of different ways at the embassy. And then also, I completely agree with the Global South comment. We're making a move to get a lot of our U.S. ambassadors in those regions linked up with, for example, our embassy here and our ambassador here, but to kind of message to Global South audiences about what the situation actually is in Ukraine and what kind of assistance is needed, what kind of support is needed, so that we can try and get in front of some of those harmful Russian narratives.
Thank you. I see Luca.
Yeah, I would agree with Wes as well. It's about literacy, and really fighting propaganda should be starting from the very childhood, when we teach our children critical thinking. And I think it should be a must, maybe for our times, for our planet. And also building a parallel narrative about Ukraine. So Russia, they have really a lot of resources to build their propagandic narratives, and it's we don't have as much resources. So that's why we can build a parallel narrative and tell everything about Ukraine, like a history of Ukraine. Yeah, if they say that Ukraine wasn't before Lenin invented it, so there is a history, and we can promote this, we can spread this information as well. The same with culture, the same with other topics.
Thank you. So,
yeah, just to comment on the Global South as well, is before, I think last year, Ukraine had multiple embassies in Africa that were not filled. And Ukraine now has around 10 embassies in Africa, a continent of 54 countries, if I'm not mistaken. And so we're to blame. We're the ones who didn't work enough with those countries prior to the full-scale invasion, while Russia has embassies in almost every African country, has projects, has militants protecting some of the local regimes, and so on, right? And so if we didn't put the effort, we didn't do groundwork in most of those countries, in India, in African countries, in South America, right? Then why would we expect those countries that we didn't care about for them to care about us?
But the situation is changing for better in terms of at least understanding that it has to
Yes.
be worked with.
Unfortunately, it's hard to overcome because again, Russia is pouring resources, and Russia already has a base. So there were really good examples of cooperation when a lot of around 10, 15 top-level journalists from Africa came to Ukraine, or from South America came to Ukraine. They met the Ukrainian government officials, they met Ukrainian journalists, they actually went to places destroyed by Russia, and they learned from their personal experience what's happening in Ukraine. And they then said, wow, yeah, this is we're top journalists in our field, in our countries, but we didn't know that this is what's actually happening. How can people who some of them don't even grasp where exactly Ukraine is, can understand what's actually happening? So it's a really, really long process, and unfortunately, it's moving really, really slow. But it's moving, I guess.
At least there is understanding.
I guess, yeah.
Thank you. I have so many questions, but I also want to open the floor for your questions from the audience here at America House in Kyiv, but also online. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. Charlie, my colleague, will help you with the microphone. And it's important to use microphone just because we have streaming. So any questions from the audience at this point? We have a question.
Hello. Is that working? Cool. So my name is Mark. I'm actually a colleague of Luca, and my question is actually not to you guys. Sorry, it's to the people who are in the States. And the question is, I love media. I'm my last 2 years is basically 24/7, and I see that Russian propaganda is winning in the United States. What do you guys think about that? You have an election year. Which, as Ukrainian, we think that is going to be extremely dangerous because United States is sort of saying, we need to protect the freedom of speech, but what you're actually protecting is Russian ability to brainwash tens of millions of Americans. And the case is when the richest person in the world buys social networks solely for the purpose of creating the biggest propaganda platform in the world. I think it's very dangerous. And, Elon Musk, we may not like what he's doing, but he's not an idiot. He's a genius. And therefore, if he sets himself a goal, he pretty much done many things that were considered impossible. And so if his goal is to do what he wants, which is pushing Russian propaganda, then he will be successful. He created rockets that land themselves. He can do whatever he wants. He's extremely smart. So that's my question basically to you guys. What do you think about that? What are your thoughts on this? Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Wes, will you take this one about Elon
Sure.
Musk?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. I would like to hope that Russian disinformation and propaganda isn't winning in the United States. But I do definitely agree that it is increasing, and it's very dangerous. It's not just around our elections. It's really around any kind of problem or political divisions we're having in the United States. Russia is right there latching on to whatever is dividing us and exacerbating it, expanding it in any way that they can. Again, back to my hometown that I'm in right now, not this virtual background, but the actual town that I'm in. I go around, and a lot of my friends, family, neighbors, they're really believing whatever the first thing they're seeing on Facebook is, or on X or TikTok, or whatever the first thing they're seeing is. And, oftentimes it can be that they're seeing something from kind of a Russian bot farm. So it's quite dangerous. And, again, I'm in a rural town in the middle of nowhere, and somehow Russia's having an effect here, which is scary to think about. But again, I think that in the United States, we have to continually inform our public on media literacy, on these other kinds of tools and techniques to kind of get away from that and, read things that are true and being able to form their own opinions, educated opinions. But it's difficult. I don't have a perfect solution, but I think it is a priority of the U.S. government to kind of work on our own population, on educating us and informing us on what's coming from Russia, what's true, what's not, and how we can work to really inform ourselves.
Thank you, Wes.
Yeah,
Mark,
I
please go ahead.
I
now.
can. Sorry. Yeah, is it okay to
Go
go
ahead.
Yeah. I definitely share the concern, and I'm afraid I don't have a very optimistic answer. I guess a lot of it depends on where you are in the US, what kind of bubble you're in. I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where Harvard is. It's a very liberal town, part of a very liberal state. So here, more often than not, I don't really have to explain to anyone that Ukraine is important and support for Ukraine is important. But obviously, beyond this bubble, the situation could be very, very, very different. And also, I am a bit pessimistic because as part of my job before coming here, I did a lot on identifying disinformation and exposing various kinds of hostile narratives. And to be honest, I'm sort of pessimistic about whether or not we can handle that influx of disinformation, especially hostile disinformation, and especially when it's efficient. And what's really efficient about Russian disinformation is that it takes advantage of the divisions and polarization that already exist. It rarely invents stuff from scratch, and that's what makes it so dangerous. So again, I don't know a solution, only just keep doing our job and try to tell the truth in any way we can, which would be, I guess, especially challenging considering the development of technology and AI in particular, and the impact that it could have on the field of disinformation. It would make it so much easier to create, I don't know, fake images, fake videos, fake stories. So yeah, the only solution I have is just keep working and telling our stories the right and truthful way.
That's actually a very interesting question. Can we use AI to debunk disinformation, to counter disinformation, or it's only created to multiply it?
As I mentioned before, that we have during these 2 years, they launched many tech startups, and we have two startups as partners of PR Army, also Wool and Let's Data. So they literally detect disinformation with the help of AI. I will not go deep into technology, so I think it's enough. Yeah, and so to monitor and to figure out the disinformation, we can. But this is a question for me, for example, it's a question how to fight it and what to do. We can make a script, for example, to detect some bots in Twitter, for example, or detect some comments with disinformation. But what to do? Cut it or just delete it? It's not the way to provide the other information. Just detection for now, but I believe that it will be developing, and we will have some solutions soon.
Okay, so
Hope so.
a bit more optimistic.
Fine.
Thank you, Luca. Alexei, you wanted to?
I know AI is the new big thing. Everybody's commenting on it. I'm going to be the first person who's not going to comment on AI because I'm not an expert. But we're seeing that unfortunately, it's getting worse in a sense that it becomes harder and harder to understand what's real and what's not. And I think that at some point, there's going to be a critical mass of fakes, basically, that is generated by those who want to distort our understanding of reality. And That's something that we have to keep in mind, but I don't have an answer or a solution to this problem at the moment. Maybe in 5 years, let's say,
Oh,
or 10.
We hope, yeah. Thank you. More questions from the audience. Yes, please. You can also introduce yourself.
Good evening. My name is Valentin. I'm from Kyiv, and I have a question from Ukrainian perspective and interests. Isn't it better for us to deliver a message that currently we are not a side of Russian-Ukrainian war, but we are a part, we are a fortress, we are a battlefield in the scale of World War III, which is happening while Russian helicopter fighter killed in Spain, while we have a possibility of terroristic operation of Russian special forces in Baltic countries, while we have possibility of nukes in the space, which can destroy satellites, including Elon Musk's satellites and global communication system and security and all the rest. So for people in democratic world to understand that they are fighting against autocracy, against China, Iraq, North Korea, some other countries, and that where if democratic world will lose in Ukraine, it is a huge possibility that humanity will, civilized humanity will pay much bigger price in money, in people lives, in health, in cultural heritage. Thank you.
Anyone wants to take this question?
Sure, I can comment if nobody wants to. Well, first of all, we're at the Kyiv Independent. We're a news organization, so we can't. We're not a propaganda outlet. We're not a resource to promote something. We report on the news. We write stories that are happening or happened. So we can't frame Russian attacks, for example, in Avdiivka right now as a part of a third world war. We can report on it as it's happening and what's actually at stake, and that's how we refer to it. I think in personal communications with Western officials, with people at conferences in different countries we visited, we obviously say what we think, and we think that Ukraine is only one part of this major rift that's happening right now, of the new world order in which war and changing borders by force is a possibility, and it's decided right now in Ukraine. And a lot of Western officials understand that. But unfortunately, the problem is, even if we start shouting about it on every corner, a person in, let's say, since we're in America House, let's say Texas, I don't know, a person in Texas won't believe that the Third World War started because Ukraine lost Avdiivka, unfortunately. Or even if something happens in Tallinn, which is part of NATO, a lot of people in different countries in the States or like in, I don't know, France, they still won't think that it's something that concerns them personally. They would be sympathetic to the cause, but you can't prove to them that it's their job to care if they don't.
Thank you. Maybe Yana, you are in the US. Do you think this type of narrative would work?
Yeah, it's also very tricky. What I've discovered that what doesn't work, especially with those kind of audiences, like, people living in Texas, sometimes we want to like almost shame people, like scold them into like, how can you not support us? This is so important. And I've discovered that that definitely does not work. What works is explaining to them, how it affects them and why it should matter to them. But I think, yeah, it's human nature to focus on your own well-being and to sort of question those things. So we need to kind of find a way to deal with that.
Thank you. Actually, when I was asking about emotions, that's what I noticed, that a lot of emotions, our stories try to, create our guilt and shame. And sometimes this doesn't work just because people, don't want to go into that killjoy type of emotions. Do you think we could, like you talked about resilience, any other examples of how we could shift this, type of attitude towards Ukraine?
We can tell we are a really big tech hub. in Europe, and not only in Europe, because we have so many service companies that work with United States and with Northern America in general. So I think that we can talk about our tech talents. Let us say we are also very creative. So many agencies have won awards in advertisement, in marketing, etc., etc. So we have a lot of talented people. We also can talk about this.
What we can offer to the world.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think, Alexei, you also mentioned investments, right? And working with businesses.
Well, yeah, we have a whole team that is looking at what people search when they search this region, Ukraine and Russia and Eastern Europe in general, and we try to figure out what people are interested in. We're also constantly looking for new, interesting stories that maybe people wouldn't think that they would be interested in, but still trying to attract their attention. For example, we recently had a pretty popular story about bird watching in Ukraine, where the main focus was that a lot of bird watchers were at early stages of the full-scale war. They were actually detained and thought that they are some kind of spies, because if there's some random person walking around a forest and looking at the sky, or like at the, I don't know, at birds, then not a lot of people are gonna believe that this person is actually a bird watcher, right? So there's a lot of stuff that we can do to, again, make sure that people care, but we can't force ourselves on those people, and as was mentioned, we can't shame people into caring about themselves or their day-to-day life more than about a foreign country, right?
Thank you, Luca.
Yeah, I would add here maybe that for many people, Ukraine became something very, very new in their life, and we can help them to discover it. For example, Ukrainian culture. Now we are separating like Ukrainian culture from Russian culture, and we can tell about this. We also can build these very good associations that this is not Russian, this is Ukrainian thing, like borscht, for example. We can discuss it, not with you, but with the world. Yeah, that borscht could be like hummus. Who invented hummus, actually? So the same thing. It's discussable, but we can communicate it, our culture, what we are different. So I think this help to discover the world, help the world to discover Ukraine.
Thank you. Wes, maybe you could also share some of the good Ukrainian associations. Maybe they already exist.
Yeah. Well, first I was going to say, just in reference to the question that came from the audience, it's interesting because if you look at the past year and you listen to President Biden or other US officials, you'll see that the talking points they've used with Ukraine have kind of shifted a little bit over the past year in two distinct ways to me, at least. One is that they're very focused on talking about what our U.S. assistance to Ukraine does for the United States, what kinds of jobs it provides in different states that are manufacturing weapons or other equipment. That's one. But then two, like the person mentioned in the audience, they have also really referenced quite a bit that this isn't the end for Russia. They don't stop at Ukraine. They'll continue and continue. And Putin is this dictator who will never be satisfied, and it will affect other countries in Europe, and it will affect the United States for forever if we do nothing right now to support. So those are talking points that have been, used, especially over the past few months. But I definitely agree with what everyone's been saying. But I think for Americans, at least, it really comes down to creating some kind of personal connection. Really, why should they care? What's in it for them? Why should they care about this specific situation in Ukraine or specific things that are happening in Ukraine? And so it's interesting. I was meeting with a few of my friends that I grew up with the other night for dinner, and they were asking me about, what I'm focused on at work. And so I started off by talking about the assistance package that's being held up in Congress and how that's taking up all of my time. and they were just like, like eyes glazing over, like, please don't talk to me about Congress. like I'm just focused on my kids, on my jobs. I do not care about what Congress is doing, what bill they're trying to pass. But then I talked to them about how I recently went on a trip with the ambassador to Dnipro and Kryvyi. And when we were in Dnipro, we visited a kind of a crisis hospital where Ukrainian soldiers were there who had just been attacked, unfortunately, and had to have amputations or other surgeries performed. They would be in the hospital for just a few days and then move to, other longer term hospitals or situations. And the U.S. has provided a generator there, as well as some other types of assistance. So I was talking about that. And I was also talking about just meeting the soldiers. I mean, that was my first time personally meeting Ukrainian soldiers who've been fighting and talking to them and having conversations with them. And it was for me, it was probably the most moving day of my entire life. But just talking to my friends about that, they really, really caught on to that. And maybe it's because, in this area I'm from, a lot of people go into military service for the United States. But as soon as I started talking about that, they were like, oh, wow. And so some of our assistance is going to help these people, like get prosthetic limbs or just keep the power on at the hospital. And they were really, really interested in that. And I think a lot of times when I've talked about specifically, we were able to give generators to this school or this hospital, or we were able to do prosthetic limbs for these soldiers, that really has connected a lot with at least people in my circle in the United States, friends, family members. So, some of those personal stories that relate to, what US money is doing in Ukraine, because a lot of Americans just think like, I barely have money to support my family. And all of a sudden you're telling me that some of my tax dollars are going to this country that I'll never go to people that I'll never meet. What's happening? But when you really put it in that context, like, hey, it's actually your money went maybe toward these prosthetic limbs for these soldiers who are fighting to defend their freedom. Those specific examples, I think really, really help Americans tune into what their money is doing and what good it's doing, what a good force it is in Ukraine.
Thank you, Wes. Yana, what are your experiences, maybe some good associations with Ukraine or some specific stories that moved Americans?
I think speaking of emotions that we sort of want to evoke when we tell people about Ukraine, I think gratitude is kind of a powerful one. Obviously, I'm saying this like for interpersonal communication as a journalist, like it's not my job to like thank anyone. But I had like a similar conversation with someone from the US, and I told them how the US taxpayer money, which was spent on, purchasing and sending, sophisticated air defense systems to Kyiv, has actually saved a lot of lives, and I would just like randomly add, thank you for that. This is the money that, you kind of paid towards that. And I think that can really make a little bit of a difference in the mind of the people. But I think the most challenging conversations I've had about Ukraine were not even with the people who don't care about it or don't want to support it, but with the people who actually know a lot about it and who generally support the idea of helping Ukraine, but who think that there should be a limit to this support. And usually it all stems from the fear of escalation, and usually nuclear weapons is the subject that comes up, the nuclear weapons that Russia has and supposedly may use if things get out of control. So I'm talking about like security analysts and people like that. So it's very hard for me to kind of get to them the idea that maybe giving into nuclear blackmail is not maybe the most rational approach, and maybe it does not make the world a safer place. So again, as a human being, that is something that I've really struggled with here in the US. It takes a lot of explaining and a little bit of frustration, to be honest.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Any more questions from our audience? Okay, we'll just give the opportunity. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm from the US, and we discuss a lot of positive initiatives or angles that you guys take to discuss with the international community. And I guess one of my questions is, with this international community, what was a story or direction that you wanted to pursue or tried to pursue that maybe had the opposite reaction that you expected, and how did you manage that?
Thank you, Sarah. Anyone wants to be first?
Sure.
Alexei.
Sorry for jumping. The problem is that a lot of people in Ukraine don't understand why the West and people in the States are really sympathetic to the Russian opposition, for example, the so-called liberal Russians. And so there was a lot of frustration among Ukrainians, among Ukrainian journalists, among Ukrainian people, that a lot of grants, a lot of support was going to support Russian so-called liberals that, in the mind of Ukrainians, didn't do enough or anything to stop this. Or another talking point is that those people are against Putin, but they're not against what Putin is doing. So they are against his power in Russia, but they supported, a lot of them, the annexation of Crimea, right? And when you go to a conference outside, especially for like in the early parts of the full-scale invasion, there was a tendency of putting Ukrainians and so-called liberal Russians on the same panel, at the same conference, giving equal time for both sides to kind of communicate. And a lot of people in Europe had no clue why Ukrainians didn't like it. It was absolutely shocking to understand that for them, we have to be friends because we're technically fighting for the same thing, even though Ukrainians rightfully don't think that way. And there was a lot of conferences that were basically sabotaged by this kind of not understanding of the actual context and the relationships between those people. A lot of Ukrainian journalists last minute had to basically cancel their events because they didn't want to be on the same stage with Russians. And after that, those conferences had exclusively Russians that were speaking about their horrible life in exile in, I don't know, Vienna or Paris.
Struggling.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Sure.
Thank you, Alexei. Luca.
I would say that we didn't have any topics that were not like kind of say successful yet to talk about, but there were like one more tough than other. Yeah, it depends. As I mentioned before, that it depends. Sometimes it depends on geography. For example, Malaysia. Yeah, I believe they don't care what is happening here, like in general. They are not very interested. But if we are talking about Muslims and threats to Muslims, they will pay their attention. So I think this just a very picky and tricky thing to find the right message, as you said, the right message to right people to be heard. I think so.
Thank you. I also want to remind our online audience that they have the opportunity to submit their questions in the chat box, and we will read it out loud and try to answer. And Valentin, I think you had a question.
Regarding message, what should happen for Netflix and Hollywood to pay attention to real-time events to deliver the message to huge audience?
I would say that I believe United 24 works with it like day to day, and we had as I think I didn't like dive deep there, but I saw from messages from I believe Brad Pitt and other actors that that call for support for Ukraine. Also, there was a very good campaign that I think Beckham gave his Instagram account to a doctor from Kharkiv hospital to tell people how do they live now during the Russian invasion. Yeah, so and to bring this message to the big mass of people. So I think we have this, but also good example that our TV show I think the first one, Nadia, about a paramedic or medic on the war, became one of the 10 in the charts of Netflix last year. I think people working on this, maybe we don't see like results very fast, but it happens. It happens.
No, and
Oh, sorry.
Please go ahead, Yana.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, if I could just jump in here. So recently I went to a screening of 20 Days in Mariupol here in the US, and there were a lot of people. There was a lot of interest both in the film and the subsequent kind of panel discussion. And it's available on YouTube in the US for free. Anyone can watch it. And last time I checked, there were like maybe 1.5 million views there. So there's definitely appetite to see this, to see content from Ukraine on those major platforms, not Netflix specifically, but if there is, extraordinary content like the one that was shot in Mariupol in those early days of the siege, I think it will definitely find viewers in the US and abroad in general.
Thank you. And Alexei, you were about to say.
yeah, that was basically what I wanted to say, so thank you. I'm just saying that, for example, 20 Days in Mariupol recently won the BAFTA award and is on track to having a chance of winning the Oscars, right? So if Ukraine produces good documentaries, good movies, then they will be picked up because those streaming platforms, they care about profits, they care about the business side of it. And when we start doing high quality products, then obviously those kind of companies will be really, really interested. And we see a lot of Ukrainian TV shows right now on Netflix. And I think we have the capacity and the talent to actually do that.
Thank you. Exactly. Just making sure everyone has an opportunity. Yes, please. Tell.
My name is Vitaly from Kyiv. How can you estimate the efficiency of Ukrainian counter-propaganda efforts, especially which rely to the Ukrainian government? I mean, anti-disinformation center of National Security and Defense Council and others. Do you use their works in your day-to-day work?
Should I start again?
No, I can.
We don't use their work, and unfortunately, I would say that Ukraine in general is, as a state, is not doing the best job in countering Russian propaganda. I think individual initiatives by journalists, by activists, by Twitter influencers. They're having an effect, but I think as a state, Ukraine is not the best in countering Russian propaganda. Russia is just more experienced in it, and obviously, if we try to balance their propaganda with what our government says, then we're going to lose.
Totally agree with you, and our state is not doing enough for this, and Russia started it long before, and we cannot catch up it right now, especially when we have rockets on our heads. So that's why I think maybe it's not very modest, but I think that PR Army and such organizations that appeared in this period are very important because we can support our state in this field of work that is not enough at this moment.
Thank you.
If I can add, I'll just say at the embassy, we do work with the government and the different agencies on countering disinformation and strategic communications. And, I agree with what everyone said, but I will just add that there is a big desire, at least from what I've seen in the government of Ukraine, to improve on countering disinformation. So we've been able to bring in some specialists and experts from the United States to work with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for example, as well as with some other ministries on kind of new tools, techniques, different things that they could be doing better, perhaps. And it's not just the United States. Other governments have been doing that as well. The UK government around the world is doing a lot on countering Russian disinformation, but in Ukraine, they're also doing some different programs with the government as well. So it is something that I think we're all trying to work together and provide what kind of tools and assistance we can to help the government improve on countering disinformation. But as has been said, it's hard right now when, you know, we're at war and, you know, every day there's something else happening. So it is hard to prioritize the time and the resources for that too.
Thank you, Wes. Okay, any other questions from the audience? We have online. Yes, there is a question online. Mariana, please.
Just a question to our dear speakers. So maybe you could give like a piece of advice for, you know, just regular Ukrainians who are trying to get this message across and do a lot of reposting and are active on social media. But a lot of people will agree that once you post something about Ukraine, the interest is much lower, and you could see it in the likes and interactions with the post. And there are a lot of conversations like what we can do in order to get this interest from people outside of Ukraine. So they basically return their attention to Ukraine, and like what our input can be in this process. Like, I mean, from the perspective of regular citizens. Thank you.
May I start? I think I understand that it's difficult to go through a mechanism and algorithm of social media. I think, first of all, when you're sharing something, always write some couple of sentences, couple of thoughts from you. It will be like a little bit easier to catch by algorithm. And I think we can advise here as we make these donation campaigns. Maybe all of us were related. For example, my cat took part in the donation campaign when I collected some money for my friends to buy cars for their division. So some creativity, cats, dogs, sometimes children, and of course tell stories about yourself, about your neighbors, about people you know. I think it will work.
Pets collect better money, right, than
Yeah.
humans. Thank you. Alexei, anything to add?
I think that sharing new stuff, new interesting stories that you didn't share before is also a good way forward, because if you share, again, similar stuff, then unfortunately people will just pass them because they saw similar stuff and they already cared as much as they can. So again, if you find something unique, something interesting about Ukraine or that's happening in Ukraine, or a new format with which an old story is told, I think that's your entry point into attracting more people, I would say.
One more thing I will add here. Pay attention when you are sharing any content. Just pay attention to the source, because you can share something very not valid, let us say, and the date of this post made, so it could be not relevant already, and it will just pass. People will just pass through this.
Thanks. One more question from me. I'll ask Wes. Ukrainian sense of humor, yes or no? Memes, do they work outside of Ukraine? They work very well inside Ukraine, you know. They keep us alive. But what do you think about them?
Oh, that's a really good question. You know, Ukrainians, I want to just say, in the Wes Jeffers personal opinion, not the opinion of the US government, Ukrainians are probably the best at memes in the entire world out of every country I've worked in, out of every person I've worked with. I think they're amazing, and they do. I think they're pretty effective in Ukraine. Outside of Ukraine, I don't know. I feel like probably not as effective, only because at least the memes that I see and that I follow in Ukraine are very kind of Ukrainian specific. You have to understand some of the context, or understand some of the people, or understand what some of the weapons names are, understand what a HIMAR is or whatever, to actually understand, to get the meme reference. But I am impressed at how relatable and effective those seem to be in Ukraine. If I can, just for a bit of a tangent, not related to memes, unfortunately, but I was just going to say on the messaging side of things, I happen to think that video is really effective. And if you notice on our U.S. Embassy social media, which hopefully you're all following, Ambassador Bridget Brink, or U.S. Embassy Kyiv, on X, on Instagram, on Facebook, on everything, you'll see that we do a lot of video. We have a really, really good video team, but we try to do short, effective videos for almost everything. We try to do video of what the ambassador's doing. We do video on important days of commemoration, like today with the Heavenly 100. And we do videos, or at least we try to do videos, for all of the different kind of high level Americans that come to Ukraine, whether it's congressmen or others, because again, our primary audience is Ukrainians in Ukraine, and we want to be able to explain to them what we're doing. Why are these people here? What's their goal? What are they trying to accomplish? How are they going to bring more U.S. assistance to Ukraine? So we're always trying to do kind of short, effective, interesting videos. So that's just, a little tangent from my working life in Ukraine. But also, I'll just mention just kind of what's happening in your life in Ukraine. I still think that a lot of Americans find very interesting. The most popular tweet that our ambassador had over the past year was at the end of December, when we had our day of really heavy attacks, December 28th or 29th, across the country. We just did a screenshot of a phone. It wasn't the ambassador's phone. It was one of my colleagues' phones, but it was just a screenshot of all the air alert messages, just to show, like, this is what we all woke up to today in Ukraine. And for Americans, like for all of my friends, family, colleagues here in the United States, they were just like, oh my God, like that's insane. All of those air alerts, that's so scary. And we're like, yeah, but in Ukraine, you deal with this every day. And if you're not in Kyiv, you have it way worse with the different types of alerts you get. But that was really eye-opening to a lot of people, and that got a ton of traction. And so I do think people, even, Americans who might be kind of familiar with Ukraine, they don't really know what's going on the day-to-day. And it's crazy, right? I mean, it's not easy to explain what day-to-day life is like in Ukraine. I don't think it's easy to explain anyway, because you are kind of trying to live your normal life while dealing with air alerts, while dealing with missiles, while dealing with like checking in with relatives who could be injured. You're trying to find out if they're safe. You have to figure out if you're going to wake your kids up for an air alert, if you're going to let them sleep so they won't be tired at school the next day. You're just dealing with such an unreal, unusual situation. And I think kind of illuminating that as best as you can for outside audiences is really interesting to people. I mean, it's really eye-opening for them. It helps them understand, like, this is what's going on in Ukraine, and this is why we want you to know about it. This is why we want your support.
Thank you. Thank you, Wes. Okay, we are about to close our program, so just making sure everyone had a chance to ask their questions. It's your last call. My very last question to you. So we are finishing our program on a positive note. The words of wisdom to young digital influencers or journalists who just start their careers, what to say to the international audience?
And you're expecting to end on a positive note. Okay.
I hope so.
Yeah, that's nice. Unfortunately, it's going to get worse. The situation is going to get much, much worse, and it's going all downhill in Ukraine and around the world as well. So my only advice is to understand that it's going to be a long fight, and to be ready to continue what you're doing, even if you're doing a small thing. If you're collecting money for your friends at the front line or reposting Ukrainian coverage, right? It's still something that's worth doing. It's something that helps. And it's always better to do something than doing nothing, right? And I'm really, really thankful to all the people online, to people in Ukraine, to people around the world who 2 years in, who they care and they're trying to do their best to move the needle and help Ukraine basically survive this.
Thank you. Not positive, but very honest. Thank you, Alexei. Luca.
Maybe it's a kind of resume of what you said, but be systematic, be honest, and don't stop. Actually, yeah, it's for a long time.
Thank you. Yana.
Yeah. I'm just going to speak outside the box a little bit. I would say that I definitely agree that it's a marathon, not a sprint. So it's important to take care of yourself, whether you're a journalist, whether you're like an influencer or any kind of digital communicator. It's important to maintain your own well-being, because unless you are well, you probably won't be able to communicate that efficiently. And I've also noticed that being overly emotional in communicating with foreign audiences does not always work. What works a lot better is speaking to them in like a composed, collected, dignified sort of way. And that's where we should be striving towards.
Thank you. Wes.
Yeah, I would say have hope and keep a hold of that hope. If you don't have hope, really, then you don't have anything. So have that. And yeah, just know that you're important and what you're doing is important, no matter how small, no matter how big, no matter, if you think it's effective or not effective, it is important. And so please keep that in your heart and your mind. And then just to say something extra from what everyone else has said, have a good support network, whatever that means for you. If it's a dog, a cat, a friend, a loved one, it's really, really important, I think, for all of us that are involved in this in one way or another. It's good to have a support network to kind of rely on and keep you healthy and keep you going.
Thank you so much, colleagues. I hope this young journalist who needed these words today heard them, and that will help their career in the future. I really want to thank our guests online and offline. Please join me in a round of applause. Thank you, everyone, for your questions, for being such an incredible audience, and wishing everyone a peaceful evening. Good evening. And if you have a moment, please stop by our gallery. We have an amazing exhibit. We just opened it yesterday. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.